Hi everyone, in this video we're going to go through the post-Bacc Econs H2 question 6a. Explain how challenges in the global environment can lead to macroeconomic problems for Singapore given the nature of her economy. So let's break down this question together. So when we look at this question, it has the word macro problems, which obviously points us to the four macro goals, right? So the four macro goals, if not met, right, essentially are your macro problems. So when we do this question, remember it is leaving it open to talk about the different goals and not a particular goal like economic growth. If not, they will specifically state economic growth. Given the nature of her economy, so this question gives us a hint that they want us to link to the problems that Singapore typically faces because of her nature, right? So we can detail that as Singapore's economy is small, it's open, and because of that, they are reliant on trade for raw materials as we lack that natural resources. And we can also say how we are susceptible to external shocks. So when they ask you for the challenges, right, they want you to explain different things that are happening in the global environment in recent years, which affects Singapore's government achieving his or her macro goals, right? And because the question says global environment, the kind of reasons that you would be expected to give are external reasons and not reasons that happen in the domestic market. Okay, so in order to explain the challenges in the global environment and how we link that to macro problems, obviously they are looking at AD factors and any challenge that could also link to your AS factors, right? Obviously, the problems can be both AD or AS, but for the purpose of scoring these 10 marks, we want to display our knowledge that macro problems can be related to um, reasons that link to AD, such as C, I, G, X minus M. But since it's more the global environment, we will be paying closer attention to X minus M. And we also want to display our knowledge that macro problems can happen through AS factors as well. So we will most probably be talking about the cost of production, which is linked to the nature of Singapore's economy being reliant on trade for raw materials. So for such a question, it requires some knowledge of what happened in the last few years that has threatened Singapore's macroeconomic goals. So what are some AD factors that we could possibly talk about? We could talk about how there has been a reversal of globalization as countries are restricting trade with one another. We can also talk about how the global environment has not been doing well due to the pandemic, and that has caused decreased economic activity and foreign direct investments, right? Because we still want to link it as an external problem. And for the AS factors, what could possibly affect Singapore's aggregate supply, right? And since we have already established that Singapore is reliant on trade for raw materials, then you could talk about any reason that has caused increasing cost of production due to higher prices of raw material from overseas. Right, so you'll probably be talking more about the SRAS. Okay, but whether you have this question or not, right, we see that macro questions revolving around macro problems, sometimes they tell you macro problems, they leave it broad for you. to consider the different effects on unemployment, growth, inflation, and balance of trade. Or sometimes they can change it to particular goals, right? They want you to talk only about economic growth, right? Then you have to talk about actual and potential growth. So it's dependent on the question. But what remains the same is that as much as we can, we would want to bring out, just give me a second for, as much as we can, we would want to bring out factors which are related to AD and AS, and not only AD or AS factors, right? And that will be the best way of showcasing your ability to understand the AD-AS concept and the links to the macro problems. Sometimes the question can ask challenges which are internally or externally related. But in this particular case, they say global environment, so we talk only about external problems that have cropped up. Okay, if they ask about internal problems, then perhaps you want to talk about how Singapore's productivity growth in their labor supply is not as fast as before, right? So that is a domestic problem. Okay, but for the purpose of this question, I say again, it's talking about the external challenges. So more importantly, how do we structure our essay? It's quite simple. In the first part, introduction, we would want to give some background of the country we're looking at. In this case, background of Singapore. We said they have a small domestic market. They have lack of factor endowment, susceptible to external shocks. Then in the second paragraph, you will talk about the challenge one, right? In this case, they want different challenges in the global environment. So we will give an external reason, right? And this is where we use AD-AS concepts to explain how this challenge links to macro problems. Right? So you can talk about how it affects growth, unemployment, balance of trade, right? In this case, we must make sure that we talk about different types of macro problems, right? And not just one, because that's what the question wants. Okay, so perhaps you would choose that in this paragraph, you want to focus more on reasons related to AD, right? Which you have talked about above, right? Naturally, for such a question, you will then, in your next paragraph, talk about what's the other challenge, right? Whether internal, external. In this case, we have to give an external reason, but we will also use AD-AS concepts and we will link it macro problems. Right, of course, in this second paragraph, our focus will be things that affect the AS, either SRAS or LRAS, depending on the point that you bring up. Okay, if you have more reasons than these two, you can always bring in these reasons and just link them to AD or AS. Okay, so that's all for this question. For more details on how to write the answer in prose, please look at the answer guide that has been uploaded as well. Thank you.